The numbers were supposed to be impossible. A 48-team World Cup, 104 matches, billions of viewers, the biggest sporting event ever staged across North America. The tournament that was supposed to prove the United States could host anything, manage everything, and dominate the global stage. And yet, within days of kickoff, a completely different picture started emerging. Not from television broadcasts, not from official FIFA press releases, from hotel lobbies, from ticket markets, from local business owners, from the data. Because while the world is supposedly watching, something strange is happening inside the host cities themselves. The fans are not arriving in the numbers everyone expected, and the deeper you look, the harder it becomes to ignore. For years, the 2026 World Cup was sold as an economic jackpot. Politicians promised it, tourism boards promoted it, consultants projected it. The expectation was simple. Millions of international visitors would flood American cities. Hotels would sell out, restaurants would overflow, local businesses would experience the most profitable summer in years. That was the promise. Then reality arrived. According to hospitality industry surveys and reports from properties across multiple host cities, demand has fallen significantly below what many operators were expecting. And not just in one location. Across the tournament footprint, that is where this story starts becoming uncomfortable. Because when a mega event underperforms expectations, people usually blame weather, or scheduling, or pricing. But this appears to be something deeper, something structural. In Arlington, Texas, home to one of the tournament's most important venues, local tourism officials began publicly acknowledging slower than expected demand. Hotels that spent months preparing for a surge suddenly found themselves facing a completely different challenge. Empty rooms, unused inventory, missing visitors. And then the same pattern started appearing elsewhere. Dallas, Philadelphia, other host markets. Properties that had dramatically increased room rates in anticipation of World Cup demand suddenly found themselves cutting prices. Some reportedly reduced rates below what they normally charge during a standard summer period. Think about that for a moment. The biggest sporting event in history arrives, and some hotels end up charging less than they would have without it. That is not what anyone projected. But the most revealing detail may be what happened before the tournament even began. Because FIFA had reserved enormous blocks of hotel rooms years in advance, thousands upon thousands of rooms. The message to the market was obvious. Demand is coming. Prepare now. Hotels responded exactly how you would expect. They adjusted forecasts. They changed pricing strategies. They rejected normal bookings. They built entire revenue plans around those reservations. Then something happened. FIFA reportedly exercised contractual options allowing portions of those room blocks to be released. The reservations disappeared. The demand signal vanished. And suddenly businesses that had spent years preparing for a boom were staring at uncertainty. The issue wasn't just the cancellation itself. It was what the cancellations revealed. Because if the demand was really as strong as projected, why were those rooms no longer needed? That question still hangs over the tournament, and it gets even more complicated because hotel bookings are only one piece of the puzzle. The atmosphere on the ground is creating a second problem, one that cannot be measured simply through occupancy rates. A World Cup is supposed to feel like a celebration, crowded streets, packed fan zones, a festival atmosphere, the kind of environment that attracts even more visitors through momentum alone. But many reports from host cities describe something very different. Heavy security, restricted access areas, road closures, parking bans, massive perimeter controls, a visible security presence around major venues. Now, to be fair, security at a World Cup is normal. No serious person expects an event of this size to operate without extensive protection, but critics argue that the balance feels different, less like a festival, more like a controlled operation, and that perception matters because perception influences behavior. If fans perceive friction, some choose not to travel. If travel becomes complicated, some postpone trips. If uncertainty increases, attendance forecasts become harder to achieve. And that leads directly into another issue, the border system. Remember, this tournament is not being hosted by one country. It is being hosted across three: the United States, Mexico, and Canada. That sounds exciting on paper. In practice, it creates enormous logistical complexity, millions of visitors, multiple visa systems, different entry requirements, different customs procedures, different security protocols, different legal environments. Moving people across those systems smoothly was always going to be difficult. The question was whether the tournament could make that complexity invisible. Increasingly, it appears impossible to hide. And then the political environment entered the story. Because sporting events do not exist in isolation. They exist inside whatever reality surrounds them. And the reality surrounding this World Cup is unusually complicated. Protests emerged around some host cities. rallies, demonstrations connected to international conflicts, immigration debates, domestic political tensions, foreign policy disputes, issues completely unrelated to football suddenly became part of the tournament narrative. That matters because FIFA's central message has always been unity. The World Cup is marketed as a global gathering, a celebration that transcends politics, a competition that brings people together. But every time political controversy appears outside a stadium, that message becomes harder to sustain. And every time organizers attempt to separate football from politics, reality pushes back, because reality refuses to stay outside the gates. This is where the story becomes less about sports and more about trust. Trust in projections, trust in forecasts, trust in institutions, trust in the promises that were made years ago. Take ticket sales. Official attendance figures and ticket distribution numbers can tell one story. Secondary markets can tell another. When resellers struggle to move inventory, analysts pay attention, because secondary markets often reveal what consumers are actually willing to pay, not what organizers hope they will pay, not what sponsors expect them to pay, what they will genuinely pay. And when prices soften despite unprecedented hype, questions emerge. Were demand projections too optimistic? Were economic conditions underestimated? Did international travel barriers have a bigger impact than expected? Or was the tournament simply marketed around assumptions that never matched reality? No one seems eager to answer that directly. Instead, explanations arrive one piece at a time. Travel costs, currency pressures, global uncertainty, political concerns, visa delays, security perceptions. Each explanation sounds reasonable. The problem is that together they create a larger picture, a picture suggesting the challenges were not random, they were predictable. And if they were predictable, why weren't they addressed earlier? Then comes perhaps the strangest contradiction of all. On the field, some things are actually going well. Matches are being played, teams are competing, players are producing memorable moments. In many cases, the football itself remains compelling, but that success creates a paradox, because the better the football becomes, the more attention shifts toward everything surrounding it. The contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Inside the stadium, celebration. Outside the stadium, questions. Inside the tournament, competition. Outside the tournament, uncertainty. And nowhere is that contradiction more visible than with the United States itself, because this event was never just about football. It was a showcase, a projection, a statement. The United States was supposed to demonstrate organizational mastery on a global stage, a moment of confidence, a moment of capability, a moment of proof. Instead, critics increasingly argue that the tournament is exposing weaknesses rather than hiding them. Weaknesses in forecasting, weaknesses in coordination, weaknesses in expectations. The gap between what was promised and what actually materialized is becoming part of the story, and once that gap becomes visible, it is difficult to make it disappear. Supporters of the tournament push back against all of this. And it is important to acknowledge their argument. They point out that attendance remains substantial, that television audiences are enormous, that economic benefits often take years to measure, that major events always face criticism during their early stages. And they're right about one thing: judging the entire World Cup before it concludes would be premature. The tournament is still unfolding. There are still major matches ahead, still opportunities for momentum, still opportunities for perceptions to change. But that does not eliminate the questions. It simply postpones the answers, because the underlying concerns remain. Hotels that expected windfalls, businesses that prepared for crowds, host cities that invested heavily, tourism officials who sold ambitious forecasts. Everyone is now waiting for the same thing: the final numbers, the final attendance figures, the final economic impact, the final accounting. And that is where the real controversy may ultimately emerge. Not in a single match, not in a single protest, not in a single hotel cancellation, but in the comparison between projection and reality. Because projections are easy, execution is hard, marketing is easy, delivery is hard, promises are easy, results are hard. The 2026 World Cup was designed to project strength, efficiency, and global appeal. Instead, what many observers increasingly see is a giant stress test unfolding in real time. A stress test of infrastructure, of tourism demand, of international mobility, of institutional planning, and perhaps most importantly, of public trust. The tournament is far from over. The story is still developing, but one thing is already becoming clear: the biggest question surrounding this World Cup is no longer who will win it. It's whether the event itself can deliver what it promised. Because the deeper investigators dig into the numbers, the stranger the picture becomes. And if the early warning signs are accurate, the most important results of this World Cup may have nothing to do with football at all.